For those of you who are not regulars here, and I assume that we have some who are not, our custom here, our practice at press conferences is to have the senior wire service reporter, in this case I guess he's on the front row, who will conclude the proceedings usually at the half-hour mark, or else when the questions tend to run out or at least wither. The drill today will be as follows. We have with us, of course, Mr. Meese, the Attorney General, and Henry Hudson, who is the U.S. Attorney across the river. He also has been leading the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography as its chairman. Mr. Hudson will be presenting the final report of the Commission to Mr. Meese. That'll be the first part of this session, and then Mr. Meese will be available for a few general questions before he has to leave. Henry Hudson then will brief in detail and answer your questions following that. So with that, Henry, would you proceed?
Thank you very much, Terry. It is a pleasure today for me to present to Attorney General Meese the final report of the Commission on Pornography. This is the first opportunity that Mr. Meese has had to review the report since we were impaneled in May of 1985. This report represents a one-year effort on the part of 11 commissioners. There were 6 public hearings, literally hundreds of letters and testimony submitted to us in writing. I believe the report follows very carefully the mandate of the Commission and answers as best 11 people possibly could the questions you posed to us, Mr. Meese.
Do you want to, let's, over here, step around here. Well, Henry Hudson, I would like to thank you and the members of the Commission for the hard work that you have undergone in the course of the past year, and we will review these recommendations with a great deal of interest. I will assure you that the hard work of the Commission will receive very careful scrutiny by the Department of Justice, and we will be providing an expression of appreciation directly to the members of the Commission at a later date when I'll have the chance to greet them personally and to thank them for their service. But at this point, I would particularly like to thank you for your service as Chairman. Now, I'll be happy to take any general questions that anybody might have, and then, as Terry pointed out, Mr. Hudson will be glad to brief and answer questions in detail. Do we have any questions that you'd like to ask me? Okay? Yes.
Mr. Meese, when you accepted the Attorney General's Commission on Organized Crime report, the members of the Commission were present. Are they not here today because some of them are dissenting and do not agree with the findings of this report?
No. I wanted to have a luncheon for them, and the first time we could get on the schedule was later in the month, and so we will be greeting them at that time. But I wanted to have a special opportunity to have a personal chance to thank them and to provide an expression of appreciation for their service. We were able to work that out with the President's Organized Crime Commission at the White House on a particular date. Our schedule has had to arrange for this a little later. Right here, and then we'll get to you.
From what you know about the Commission reporting, you read the newspapers like everybody else. Do you have any reservations about what you're hearing?
Well, I don't get my facts when I have the original document. I don't rely on other sources. I'll read the document itself and then make my conclusions about the report based on the actual recommendations. Yes.
Yeah. What was your reaction to the cover of the New Republic?
A great amusement. Yes.
The report does say in a general way that recommends setting up a task force on obscenity to follow through with this, headed by a top-level official of the Justice Department and bringing in the U.S. attorneys and FBI and so forth. What do you think about this approach, and can you comment on it?
Well, I won't comment on any of the recommendations until I've actually read the report and read the specific recommendations as the Commission has presented it. Now, in the back, there's somebody had a question.
Where do you go from here? You have this document, read it, there's already been some legislation introduced. What do you anticipate happening in the next 6 months?
Well, I can't say precisely because we haven't read the report yet. I intend to have the report reviewed by the appropriate sections of the Department of Justice. We will then have our usual intra-departmental strategy review and make the determinations of the action steps that flow from the report. What those steps are, I can't say until I've read the report. Yes.
General, I wanted to ask a question about whether or not you personally have a view about the following matter.
About the what?
The following matter that I'm going to suggest to you.
All right.
The report suggests in several places that the public depiction of even what you and I perhaps could agree was normal sex between married couples can in fact be harmful to human sexuality. Have you ever publicly attended a display of normal sex and had the sensation that your sexuality was harmed thereby?
Well, I'm not going to comment substantively until I've read the report. And I'm sure you're not interested in my personal observations. Fred?
Are you disturbed at all by the fact that a federal district judge enjoined the commission from taking an action that was alleged to be unconstitutional in connection with the so-called blacklist matter? And do you think that there is a danger here that perhaps some individual rights were violated by the way this organization that you put together operated?
Well, this was all done by the commission, and I think Mr. Hudson's in a better position to answer what exactly was done. I don't know exactly what the commission did. I do understand there was never any contemplation of a blacklist, but he can expressly respond to that. And the only other thing is I understand that the very limited order of the court, which was not all the things that the plaintiffs were asking for, that the commission does intend to comply by sending the notice or whatever it is that the judge required.
That anyone might conceivably think that the statue behind you is pornographic.
I don't know. Okay.
Mr. Meese, the nation just finished a massive celebration of liberty over the last weekend, and here you have a very weighty report that is calling for restrictions on what American adults can read and see and so on. Are those two consistent or mutually exclusive?
Well, I don't know whether the report's calling for that at all because I haven't read it yet. Go ahead.
Are you concerned at all that this document is going to foster a censorship mentality in this country? And if you are, how do you address yourself?
Well, I am not concerned about any censorship being fostered by this document because I know that this department, as long as I'm the Attorney General, is not going to engage in censorship in the sense that in any way it violates the First Amendment. As you remember, the Supreme Court has said that obscenity, that illegal activity, it is not the kind of thing that is subject to the protection of the First Amendment. But I can guarantee you that there will be no censorship in the sense of in any way infringing upon First Amendment rights.
Are you comfortable with the existing Supreme Court definition of obscenity, or do you feel perhaps it ought to be broadened?
Well, I have generally been comfortable with the Supreme Court definition. However, to whatever extent this may be addressed in the report, I would want to wait and see what has been the findings of the Commission. Yes.
Several of the commissioners have said that they needed or could have used more time and resources rather than just a year and what, $500,000 or whatever. Did you consider extending the time and the resources for the panel?
Well, I think any study can go on as long as time and resources are permitted, and it could have been 3 years or 5 years and so on. We felt it was important to take the limited objectives that were given to the Commission and to carry that out in the course of the year. And I think Mr. Hudson will be able to assure you when he briefs you on the report that they were able to complete their work within the year. We did extend them, I think, for 30 days because it was felt that that additional time was needed to complete the report. Is that right? 15 days, excuse me. Yes.
At one point in the report it says there was a decline in obscenity prosecutions in recent years, and one of the reasons cited was a lack of public outcry demanding same. Given that lack of public outcry, you know, what are you doing here, I guess is my question.
Well, let me read the report first before I comment on anything it might be saying. Hello.
Even if you don't want to be specific now in terms of recommendations, the report certainly suggests that there's been a difference since 1970 in terms of the availability of pornographic material, public exposure to it, that kind of thing. Have you yourself noticed an increase which you would find disturbing, trends which you would find disturbing, the quality of the material or the explicitness of material which you would find disturbing? And do you think there should be a crackdown of some sort on pornography?
Well, as far as the first part of your question, I have not done a detailed study of pornography since 1970 personally, and so I can't really answer that. I'll be interested in what the Commission has found in their study, and as to whether there should be a crackdown or anything else, that would depend on the reading of what the Commission recommends. Yeah.
As you may know, some of the social scientists whose studies were cited in the Commission have said that the Commission went beyond their findings in reaching the conclusion of a causal relationship between pornography and sexual violence or sexual abuse. I'm wondering, aside from the recommendations, if you agree with that central thesis of a causal relationship.
Well, I don't know because I haven't read that. I think Mr. Hudson would be glad to respond, though, to that particular comment during his briefing. Yes.
What can you say about the allegations that some have made that perhaps the Commission was kind of a stacked deck, more right, moderate, less liberal?
Well, I think the purpose in selecting the Commission was to get a variety of points of view, and the one thing I have read in the newspapers were that there were many varied points of view brought together, and that different people had different viewpoints that were expressed both, I assume they'll be expressed in the course of the report, and they were certainly expressed in some of the hearings. So I think we have had a group of people in which journalism was represented, in which lawyers were represented, in which community interests, in which those psychology, people dealing with children. There were a whole variety of points of view and experience and skills and expertise that were represented in this commission. And we felt and still feel that it was a very balanced commission, and I think that I'm very hopeful that as I read the report that the product of the commission will show that there was both that balance and that expertise. Yes.
What lessons, sir, do you learn from the vote in the state of Maine last month against a statewide crackdown on pornography?
Well, I didn't follow that very closely, so I don't know what the issues were precisely there, and so I don't know how they square with what may be, for example, the recommendations in this report. Yes.
Regardless of what the report says, do you personally believe that publications such as Playboy and Penthouse and other so-called soft-core pornography contribute in any way to violence and rape?
I don't know. That's again, I've never done any study on that, and so I couldn't really give you an opinion. Yes.
Does it scare you that commissioners are making determinations of what should be considered pornography and what not, when if those standards were ever enforced, this document hypothetically could be declared obscene?
Well, I don't know what standards they're recommending, and I don't know whether, in fact, if their standards were implemented, this report would qualify under it. I certainly doubt that it would qualify under anything that I would consider something that should be restricted, because I think the kinds of things that are represented here would enjoy the protection. These documents would enjoy the protection of the First Amendment.
But how do you draw that line? What gets the
Well,
First Amendment?
that's something you ought to address to Mr. Hudson. I'll tell you after I've read the report. Yes.
Regarding the social scientists who said that their findings were misinterpreted by the Commission, do you plan on getting in touch with them when you and your staff try to decide what to do about the findings in this report?
I don't know. I think it would depend on what we found after reading the report, and I would want to talk with Mr. Hudson about that before we went behind the report and went into the views of any of the people who may have contributed testimony.
I'm curious why you came to the press conference today. This report, the draft has been available for about 2 months, and you have not read it, and so you cannot comment on it.
I came to the press conference for 2 reasons. One was to publicly receive the report from the chairman of the commission, because there had been expressed to our Public Affairs Department a great desire to take pictures of that event, a suggestion which I think has been borne out by the facts here today. And secondly, to answer any general questions about this matter, including the general questions about the composition of the commission and that sort of thing, which I have. I mentioned at the start that I would not be able to answer any questions about the report. It has not been out. This is the first time that the final report has been delivered. I don't know there have been draft reports out there, but I prefer to base my comments on the final report rather than on drafts that may have occurred at various points during the deliberations of the commission. Okay, we have a, so as not to waste Nina's time here, are there any more questions I can answer? Yes.
Regardless of what the report says, could you describe the current priority assigned to federal obscenity and pornography prosecutions in the Justice Department, and could that priority be raised appreciably without taking away from prosecutions in organized crime, drugs, and other areas?
Well, we consider obscenity prosecutions an important part of the activities of the department, particularly as they bear on some of our other, as they relate also to some of our other priorities, such as organized crime and missing and exploited children. We have conducted special courses for our federal prosecutors in the prosecution of obscenity cases. I have also conferred, for example, with all of the regional commissioners of customs who have a big part in the investigation of the importation of obscene materials, so that we do give it a priority. Whether that priority should be changed as a result of these recommendations remains to be seen. One more here.
You discussed the limited objectives of the commission, but yet on pages 339 and other places, they talk about uncommitted sexual activity and go beyond pornography per se. Does that kind of theme meet your limited objectives of what you thought the commission was going to do?
Well, I don't know, because until I read it, I can't really answer your question, obviously. Yes?
Do you believe that there is, from your point of view as attorney...
press conference once you have the time to read the report?
I have press conferences regularly, and I'll be glad to answer the questions then.
Mr. Meese, as Attorney General, do you believe that there is a distinction between pornography and obscenity?
My understanding is that there is. I do not pretend to be an expert in this field, and that's one of the things that I'll know more about after I've read the report. But that, I think you ought to address that question to Mr. Hudson, and he could answer with more particularity. Okay, I think we only, I ought to end my comments here pretty quickly with about 2 more questions so we can get on to the real information from Mr. Hudson. Yes?
In the age of Graham Redmond, was this $500,000 well spent, in your opinion?
I think that they were well spent, yes. I think this is something in which the commission was a response to many complaints, numerous complaints over a long period of time by a number of citizens, by a number of organizations and groups, community groups throughout the country, and it was on that basis that my predecessor initiated the idea of a commission on pornography, and which the work had progressed to the point when I took over as Attorney General. It was in order to actually culminate the preparation stages and appoint the commission.
Can you tell us, please, if you plan to be accepting the findings of the commission as gospel, or will you order your people to do their own checking of the fundamental findings?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is read the report, and then we could answer that question. Okay, I'll turn this over to Mr. Hudson. Beg pardon?
How long do you think it will take you to read a report of this size, and how high a priority are you going to give it in your schedule?
Well, we will have our staff people starting immediately. I don't know how long it will take, but I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to be able to digest the information here and make some plans and determine the action steps within the course of the next 2 to 4 weeks. Mr. Hudson, I'll turn this over to you, and you can give a detailed briefing on the report and answer the questions.
Yes, sir. Okay, fine. I think probably one of the most conspicuous aspects of this report will be its total divergence with the initial criticism of the Commission, namely that it was biased and lacking in objectivity. Those people who anticipated a document supporting censorship are going to be very disappointed when they read the final report, because our Commission specifically rejected the notion of censorship. In our report, we specifically recognize the very special dignity that should be accorded the printed word. We, in fact, recommend and caution against the prosecution of materials that are consisting solely of the printed word. In effect, I think our Commission very strongly supports the right of everybody to read, but we also equally oppose the abuse of women and violence and degradation of women. Aside from the very few modifications which we suggest to existing law, our report does not encourage any change in the existing laws of obscenity, with a few exceptions. We have recommended that the Mann Act be gender neutral. We have recommended that certain conflicts in the Cable Communications Act be cleared up. We've asked that a forfeiture provision be added to the pornography laws. We've also asked that one of the elemental components of the Interstate Transportation of Obscene Materials Act be amended to facilitate prosecution. But aside from that, we don't make any recommendations and changes on the law of obscenity. What we're really saying is, if communities perceive that there is an obscenity problem, existing laws ought to be enforced. The Commission did observe that obscenity over the last decade has become progressively more violent and more sexually explicit. We observed what we thought to be an unparalleled emergence of materials in the market which portray the abuse of children and depict violence and degradation toward women. The Commission did find a definite correlation between sexually explicit materials in a violent context and certain types of antisocial behavior. With respect to a second category of materials, namely those which are sexually explicit and portray those types of acts in a very humiliating and degrading way, we found a correlation with certain types of socially unacceptable attitudes. That's important to note in reading the report in its entirety, that we do not believe that the mere reading or consumption of obscenity is itself the sole cause of antisocial behavior or the sole cause of antisocial attitudes. It is merely a factor, but is a significant factor in explaining that behavior. Now, with respect to some of the other categories of materials we identified, those which consist of materials which are sexually explicit but are neither violent nor humiliating, the Commission basically found no relationship to antisocial behavior. There were a number of commissioners that expressed some concern about adverse attitudinal effects with respect to these materials, but we could not identify any real harm. And we, of course, found no harm in those materials that merely portray nudity. On the other hand, with respect to what is legally defined to be child pornography, we found that to be the most pernicious form of materials. I think, contrary to some of the popular misconceptions, the Commission did not focus its attention on mainstream publications such as Playboy and Penthouse. We addressed those materials that are illustrative of abuse of children and portray violence and degradation toward women. That was the real core of our analysis. I think another frequent criticism of the Commission is that there were inadequate scientific bases for some of our conclusions. Well, folks, if we relied exclusively on scientific data for every one of our findings, I'm afraid that all of our conclusions or all of our work would be inconclusive, because there is a real scarcity of scientific research in many of these areas. And there are a lot of considerations that went into the fashioning of this report, which really kind of defy the exactitude of scientific study. I mean, for example, how do you measure human dignity and how do you measure human decency? In formulating our conclusions, we relied upon several types of evidence. We relied upon all sources of evidence. We relied upon the testimony of social scientists, attorneys, physicians, law enforcement officials, people who purported to be the victims of crime, those who had been clearly injured by sexual abuse, and just concerned citizens that had a viewpoint they wanted to air. I believe that every facet of the issue was presented, either by oral testimony or by written statement, was considered and debated by the Commission. I would ask those people who do not feel that any particular side of the issue was aired or discussed to go back over the transcripts of our Commission hearings and see how every type of philosophy on this issue was seriously considered by the panel. For the purpose of analysis, we divided our analytical process into three tiers. We first considered the scientific evidence with respect to that category of materials. We secondly considered the totality of the evidence, all the evidence we've heard, scientific, legal, practical, as well as that of concerned citizens. We next considered the moral and ethical considerations that have to necessarily evolve from any study of this type. Also, a very crucial factor in our deliberations was that of common sense. You'll find that the textual portion of our report is divided into three broad categories. The first, and a very extensive portion of the report, are the personal comments of the commissioners. Those of you who feel that there was not a diversity of philosophy or opinion on the Commission, I would ask you to examine the personal statements and see the wide variety of viewpoints and concerns that various commissioners had, some concurring, some dissenting. The next section represents the findings and conclusions of the Commission, and the latter section, in addition to the appendices, contains various recommendations that the Commission concluded from the testimony that we heard. Now, one section of the recommendations addresses certain things the citizens can do if they perceive a pornography problem in their community. Now, it is important in reading this section that you read it in its entirety, because it is basically a compilation of successful techniques utilized in various jurisdictions that we learned of through the testimony or through written submissions, utilized to express citizen viewpoint about obscenity. It is not in the form of a recommendation by the Commission. It is merely delineating to the public that if, first of all, they make a threshold finding that obscenity is a problem in their neighborhood, these are some of the things that neighborhoods have done to address it. I think there has been considerable public commentary that precedes the publication of this report today. Unfortunately, much of that has been based upon fragmented information, speculation, and hearsay. I hope that with the formal issuance of this report, it's going to provide an opportunity for every citizen to learn firsthand what the Commission has done, and I suppose to allow them to formulate their own opinion on this very current controversial topic of obscenity. I thank you all very much, and let me see if I can answer as many questions as I can. Yes, sir.
A couple of questions, please. You said that you used common sense in a lot of your determinations of the evidence. What does your common sense tell you about the problem of pornography in America?
Pornography or obscenity? Well, my common sense indicates to me, based upon the communications that I've had, we received, I think, about 3,000 letters, and of those, about 95% were in favor of stronger enforcement of existing laws. My common sense would tell me that there is a lot of citizen concern about obscenity. My common sense tells me that the average citizen is very concerned about making sure that whatever enforcement efforts are undertaken are consistent with the First Amendment. But I think common sense indicates that there is public concern that the government ought to be responding accordingly.
Question. You said also that I wanted to know about your thoughts about the possibility of a link between organized crime and pornography and obscenity. What kind of conclusions did you draw? Could you kind of enumerate your thoughts on that, please?
The evidence that we heard would indicate that there seems to be at least the associates of organized criminal. First, well, let me preface that by saying that we're talking about organized crime, and we're talking about an organized group of people who combine together for the purpose of violating laws. I think that much of the illegal obscenity industry is organized to the extent that it could be, with a small o, considered organized crime. But with respect to classic organized crime, that which is affiliated with La Cosa Nostra and operations of that type, we found some association, and much of our testimony indicated some linkage between major distributors of obscenity and certain organized crime families. Yes, ma'am.
Could your commissioners agree on what was humiliating and degrading?
I think there was a common denominator there which was very difficult for us to express the amount of time that we had. If you read over the transcript of our deliberations, that would be something that would be in Category 3 and Category 2 to an extent. It was very, very difficult to find a consensus on how to express what is humiliating and degrading. But I believe everyone understood what the concepts meant.
Is it not true that under the definition advocated by some of the commissioners, that is that married couples or that unmarried couples engaging essentially in sport sex, that notion itself was harmful to society, that under that definition, love boat would be pornographic and of great concern?
The comments expressed in the personal section were not designed to recast the definition of obscenity. And of course, as you're aware, only materials that are obscene are not protected by the First Amendment. I don't believe that anyone attempted to recast the current definition of obscenity. I think there were a number of people on the Commission that were concerned about the privacy aspects of certain acts of sex being publicly portrayed, and that was the individual opinions of the Commissioners expressed in their sections.
In the main body of the report, I think on page 340, it says very specifically that some commissioners feel strongly that that sexual conduct between non-committed adults is harmful to society. That's in the main body of the report.
There were a number of commissioners that expressed that view, yes, ma'am, as I reflect back on it. Yes, sir.
To illustrate the problem, was it necessary to put well over 100 pages of very explicit sexual descriptions in Volume 2?
That was the majority vote of the Commission to do that, in that we felt that too often people, in attempting to evaluate what the Commission has done, do not have an accurate picture of what is obscenity and what is hardcore material. Again, to repeat a message I think I conveyed during my remarks, this Commission was not designed to address what would be ordinarily mainstream material. We're talking about hardcore type material, which is obscene, as opposed to mainstream types of publications. Yes, sir.
Say, two quick questions. What is the most important of your 90-some recommendations, and what was your conclusion about Playboy and Penthouse?
I couldn't hear you, sir.
What was the most important of your 92 recommendations?
I don't know I could single any one out as being the most important.
Overall message you want people to get about your recommendations?
I believe the most important message is that we feel that obscene publications which portray child abuse and the violence and degradation of women are socially harmful. That is the centerpiece of the report, in my view.
what's the recommendation that follows from that?
Our recommendation that follows that is that those communities that perceive that there is a problem with those types of materials should carefully evaluate their law enforcement efforts in that area with respect to obscene materials.
Mr. Hudson, you don't produce a prodigious work like this without having a clear-headed agenda as to what you want the effect to be. How do you want America changed by your study and its release?
Well, those people who have so stridently asked that there be some governmental effort to control obscene materials, I believe this report gives them a blueprint or a strategy to approach obscene materials if they feel it's a problem in their community.
So how do you want America changed by your work? Specifically?
My job was not to change America. My job was merely to report to the Attorney General on the specific areas addressed in the mandate of this commission. Yes, ma'am.
In footnote 224, you make a connection between cable and satellite television and child pornography. Could you expand on what the connection you're referring to is?
I'd have to review the report on that. I don't profess to have total recall, ma'am, of every footnote. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, can you
help me translate your categories into something more concrete, something I could say, like sexually violent?
I will. The question posed to me is whether or not I could summarize the categories into something a little bit more concrete. We divided the whole spectrum of materials into 5 categories for the purpose of analysis. Category number 1 was material that is sexually explicit and portrays violence. That would be sadomasochistic type of material, those in which the subject of the material, if it be a lady, be someone who is clearly being violated against her will, or if it be a man, it would be the same. Any type of material, with the caution, as I mentioned to you, that we were asking prosecutors everywhere to exercise the greatest amount of caution and discouraging prosecution of materials that are based solely on the printed word. We're talking about visual depictions. Category number 2, this requires a little more extensive answer. Category number 2 were materials that were sexually explicit and were degrading or humiliating. An example of this would be bestiality, materials involving inanimate objects being used to penetrate the genitalia of another person, materials of that type. The third category would be materials which are sexually explicit but neither violent nor degrading. That, in accordance with the definition of the Commission, would be materials that clearly portray a consenting relationship between the two partners engaged in sexual activity. Category number 4 was mere nudity, sexually explicit material that just merely showed nudity alone, but no sexual activity. And lastly was child pornography. One comment I made I want to clarify. I mentioned to you that we asked that great caution be exercised with respect to any material that was solely consisting of the printed word. We did mention very strongly that an exception should be made for materials found on the market today which teach people how to sexually lure and sexually abuse children. That was a specific exception to our comments on the printed word.
Which cities and states have the most problems with pornography?
I'm sorry, I can't hear this.
Which cities and states do you find have the most problems with pornography?
I can't answer that question, sir. I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
In your comment section, you say that you would have preferred to have much more forceful language used in comments regarding the harmfulness of certain types of pornography. What would you have preferred?
Well, I believe that I said that I'd like to have stronger language used with respect to some of the law enforcement recommendations.
Well, you said both, at least from what I've read.
Well, with respect to those materials that portray the abuse of children and those materials that show violence and degradation toward women, I would like to have seen a little bit stronger language used than that which is contained in the text. I'm not prepared to give you alternatives.
That's what I'm asking. What would you have preferred?
I would like to see the strongest condemnatory language we could possibly fashion, because I feel those types of materials are truly harmful.
Mr. Hudson,
If they're obscene, yes. If they're obscene. Yes.
Commissioners Becker and Levine have been portrayed as dissenters from the report, but did they not in fact vote or agree with the commission report?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hudson.
They voted the majority on the bulk of the issues.
Mr. Hudson, I'd like to ask the same question Lyle asked before, the Attorney General. I assume you've been exposed to pornography and obscenity growing up over the years, as most young American men. How did it harm you?
How did it harm me? I don't while I admit that, like I'm sure everyone in this room, I have examined pornography and obscenity, I have not made it a habit of examining the types of materials contained in categories 1 and 2, namely sadomasochistic materials, materials involving coprophilia, bestiality. I haven't examined them with any degree of regularity, so maybe I'm not a good example.
And 5, have they harmed you at all?
I don't believe they have, and I don't believe the report indicates that 3, 4, and 5 have. Child pornography, I think, is per se pernicious, sir.
The Attorney General talked about the limited objectives of the Commission. On page 339, you seem to go into the area of promiscuity and uncommitted sexuality, quoting, "None of us believe it is a good thing." Why did the Commission go into this area, and does this have any relevance to pornography in your charge?
Let me say that there were a number of commissioners that felt that the Commission should have evaluated certain types of sexual activity outside the context of it being printed or portrayed. In other words, examining activities itself to see whether or not they squared with social mores. The Commission rejected that, and I, for one, strongly spoke against it.
Why did you include that in your report?
It's not my report. It's a report that is composed of 11 commissioners, and the majority ruled on everything.
It's in the main report.
It says none of us.
None of us believe it is a good thing. You've made a moral judgment on the issue of uncommitted sexuality.
Are you one of the none of us?
Read to me the section you're referring to.
9 says, although there are many members of this society who can and have made affirmative cases for uncommitted sexuality, comma, none of us believe it is a good thing.
I believe that, as you read it back to me, I believe that is correct. I, as well as all the other commissioners, do not believe that sexual promiscuity as a generally socially condoned proposition is a good thing for society. Doesn't mean it's harmful. It's not something that should be socially condoned.
Well, the question I have is, why did you include that at all?
Because it was the majority vote of the commissioners that would be in the report. Next question. Yes, sir.
Do you feel the credibility of the report has been compromised at all by some of the criticism from some of the social scientists whose work you cited, several of whom said that they felt that it had been either misrepresented or improperly cited?
No, sir, I don't, because one of the popular misconceptions that many of those fine people have is that our findings are or should be totally predicated upon scientific data. And we specifically decided that that should not alone be the criterion on which our findings would be based. Yes, sir.
Recommendation 11 calls on the Attorney General to direct you and the 93 other U.S. attorneys to initiate obscenity investigations and commence prosecutions, and in the language of the Commission, without further delay. You feel then that this administration has been dragging its feet in bringing obscenity prosecutions?
I certainly feel that more could have been done. There are a lot, let me say this, there are a lot of United States attorneys throughout the United States who have very actively pursued obscenity cases. There are others that have not. Wait a minute, sir. One of the important aspects about this has to be kept in mind, and that is that the federal government alone cannot control the flow of obscene materials. Really, the front line of that effort has got to be with state and local prosecutors and state and local law enforcement officials. There has been a relaxation of prosecution by those individuals. We can only complement their efforts. Their function is to address violations of law at the retail level and at the local level. Our function is to prosecute those individuals that are distributing obscene materials across state lines or those involving organized crime. So to the extent there has been a total relaxation of effort at all levels, the federal government has been a part of that. And I will say that Mr. Meese is personally concerned about it. Yes.
I want to get back to the question of just how harmful some of this Category 2 material is. Let's take a movie like Debbie Does Dallas.
I'm not in a position to comment on each individual movie, ma'am.
You must have seen, as you said, when you were just preparing for this report, a great deal of pornographic material, including material that is regularly available to young men and women in America of adult age.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is material that may not even involve bestiality. It involves, in the words of the Commission, a great deal of sexual gratification for sexual gratification's sake. Do you think it harmed you or any other member of the Commission to see that material?
Well, again, you're unfortunately missing one of the important points, and that is I said that the causal link between these materials and behavior attitudes is only one factor, but a significant factor. It depends upon the individual and how predisposed one person may be toward that type of activity. Those people who are predisposed to engage in those types of activities, it was our belief that with the frequent consumption of these materials, there was a correlation between those materials and reenactment of some of the behavior depicted.
Is there any data to support that? Is there any scientific data to support that?
There are a number of scientific reports which are consistent, and you'll find an analysis of that in the scientific section of our report.
None of the scientists that you cited that I spoke to said that their data would support that conclusion.
Well, there was clearly evidence of that presented to the Commission.
Mr. Hudson, you've urged that the American people read the report. Can you tell me what plans are being made by the federal government or private publishers to reproduce and distribute this report?
No, sir, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Is this available to a private publisher to reproduce and sell?
I don't know, sir. I don't know the answer to that. Yes, sir.
Yourself on wanting stronger language personally, in at least one part of the report. Personally, do you hope and expect that this is going to be a clarion call, that it will provide a strong moral force to change the direction of the nation or to tighten its pressure personally?
I don't envision my role as being one who is here to change the nation. My function was to report on these various issues to Attorney General Meese, and I feel like we have adequately done so.
Sir, as in local communities, how law and how political groups function, would you now expect that some such groups would take this as ammunition?
Well, they very well may.
Would you hope for that, sir?
If that community feels they have a problem, if they feel that obscenity substantially affects the environment in their community, and they want to take positive steps, I'm hopeful the report will be of aid to them. Yes, sir. But they've got to make that decision on their own, whether or not in their community they feel they have a problem.
How do you expect to get this report in the hands of people when it costs $35 a copy?
I don't know, sir. I'm just one commissioner that signed off on the report, and the publication of the report is something that resides within the policies of the department.
Okay, well,
yes,
let me
sir.
ask you another question then.
Okay.
Getting back to the question of if anyone dissented from this report, it's a fact, isn't it, that all the commissioners voted for this report. That's true, right?
That's kind of hard for me to respond to because there were individual votes taken on many issues. There were some issues in which commissioners voted no on specific issues, but yet seemed to endorse the report in its entirety. It is my view, based upon the deliberations, that all of the commissioners endorsed the principles expressed in the report. Yes, sir.
It appears that you failed to name the companies that are profiting, with few exceptions, you failed to name the companies who are profiting from the production and marketing and distribution of this material. The question is, why is that so, number one? And number two, did you run across any major American corporations that were profiting from the distribution of this material, for example, the owners of cable companies and so on?
I'm not going to comment on any specific corporations. We decided at a very early stage of our deliberations that we were not going to include any specific names of any companies that distributed this type of material or those companies which broadcast this type of material.
Although you did include the name of the largest company in New York, I saw.
The one involving the Midnight Blue, they asked us to include it.
What do you say to those who charge that the Commission is trying to impose its view of morality on the American people?
Well, I would respond the same way that I do to those people that feel that the Commission was an exercise of censorship. I would ask them to read the report in its entirety. I don't believe anyone can review these types of issues without some type of discussion of the moral and ethical aspects of this type of material. But most importantly, I think you have to keep in mind that our publication, our report, suggests no changes in existing law, no changes in existing lifestyles, and focuses on materials that are abusive of children and portray women in a violent and degrading fashion. That's the centerpiece of the report. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, in the law enforcement category, on the first page, you say that local prosecutors and law enforcement officials must develop a reputation for initiating prosecutions. And you certainly developed a reputation in Arlington County by going after video rental stores that had X-rated cassettes. Do you recommend that local prosecutors in the country go into video stores and follow your own actions?
Well, first of all, ma'am, your question is based upon a false predicate. I never went out and went into a video rental store, and you'll find that of the hundreds of thousands of prosecutions in Arlington County every year, there may have been one or two obscenity violations based upon a personal complaint of a citizen. So setting aside your inaccurate factual predicate,
your actions were enough to keep X-rated cassettes out of video stores in Arlington County.
We do have a practice in Arlington County when I was Commonwealth Attorney of enforcing the law, which is that you cannot sell obscene materials. I cannot control the decisions of people, but to those that say that it was based strictly upon my efforts in prosecuting them, you'll find one, maybe two prosecutions in the years that I was Commonwealth, in the 7 years I was Commonwealth Attorney.
Mr. Hunt?
Yes.
Recommendation number 3 says Congress should enact legislation making it an unfair business practice and an unfair labor practice for any employer to hire individuals to participate in commercial sexual performances. Is it the intent of the Commission by this recommendation to stop all commercial sexual performances?
It most certainly is not. Our recommendation is to protect performers that feel that they are obligated because of their contract against their will to engage in certain forms of potentially harmful sexual activity. If they fully consent and fully agree to it, that's fine. But we don't think that this should be forced upon them as a condition of their contract.
Thank you.
No, I haven't.
Thank you.
The department will have to answer that. I don't have an answer for you. Thank you.
I'm going to have basket materials in a minute.
Generally speaking.
This piece seems to be, the screw piece seems to be coming off, but not unscrewing the,
You're probably going to have to get something like a wrench or